Good morning. So our story today comes from the Jewish tradition, and it goes like this. Once there was a farmer, and he lived in a small farmhouse with his wife and his children and his parents. And one day he came down to breakfast, and it was just so crowded and noisy and uncomfortable. People were crashing into each other. It was just chaotic. And he started to think about how uncomfortable he was in this small house with all of these people. And he thought about it and thought about it over the next couple of weeks. And it just started to really bother him, irritate him. And he found that he started to become kind of grumpy with his family and short-tempered. And so he went to the rabbi. The rabbi was a wise man, and he knew the rabbi could help him with this problem. So he went to the rabbi, and he explained the situation. And the rabbi said, "I know exactly what will help you." The rabbi said, "You are a farmer, right?" And the farmer said, "Yes." And the rabbi said, "So you have chickens, right?" And the farmer said, "Yes, I have chickens." And the rabbi said, "Okay, bring the chickens into the house." Now, the man thought this was a strange idea, but he knew that the rabbi was a very wise man. So he did what he was instructed to do, and he went home and he brought the chickens into his house. And his house was no less crowded or less noisy. In fact, it was now more crowded and more noisy because there were chickens everywhere. And they were clucking and they were pecking and there were feathers everywhere. And the next day, the man went back to the rabbi and he said, "Rabbi, I did what you told me to do, but my house is no less crowded or noisy. In fact, it's more crowded and noisy now." And the rabbi said, "Let me think." And he thought about it and he said, "Do you have goats?" And the man said, "Well, yes, I have goats." And he said, "Okay, bring the goats into the house." Now, the man knew that the rabbi was a wise man, and he thought that he should follow the advice of the wise man. So he went home and he brought the goats in the house. And do you know what? The house was no less noisy or crowded. In fact, it was more noisy and more crowded because there were chickens everywhere, and now there were goats butting heads and butting up against the walls and causing absolute chaos in his house. So the next day, the farmer went back to the rabbi, and he said, "Rabbi, I have done what you said, and my house is no less noisy or crowded. In fact, it is more noisy and more crowded." And the rabbi said, "Okay, let me think about this." He thought about it and he said, "Do you have any sheep?" And the farmer said, I have sheep." And the rabbi said, "Great, awesome, bring the sheep into the house." So the farmer went back, and what did he do? He took the sheep and he brought them into the house because he believed the rabbi was a wise man. So now in the farmer's small farmhouse, there was the farmer and his wife and his children and his parents and his chickens and his goats and his sheep. And do you think it was any less noisy or crowded? No, it was more noisy and more crowded. And now there were sheep. Sheep are big. There were sheep clomping everywhere, and there were goats, and there were chickens, and they were laying their eggs in his bed, and he didn't have anywhere to sleep, and he was exhausted and angry and frustrated. And his whole house smelled like a barn. So he went back to the rabbi, and he said, "Rabbi, I have done everything you've said, and my house is even more noisy and crowded." And the rabbi said, "Well, this is a tough one." And he thought about it and thought about it. And the farmer sat there and watched the rabbi think about it. And the rabbi said, "I know. Go home, put the chickens back in the chicken coop, put the goats and the sheep back in the barn, and then your house will be less noisy and crowded." Now that seemed to make sense. So the man went home and he put the animals back where they belonged, and his family, his wife and his children and his parents cleaned up the house, got it smelling nice and fresh. And the next morning, the farmer woke up and he sat down at breakfast and he thought to himself, "What a spacious, quiet, peaceful home I have." Thank you for listening to my story today.